All right, Formula One Philosophy is back for its Spanish Grand Prix recap. This is the bad parts of the episode that we saw at the Grand Prix. This will be a dense episode, I imagine. We ended...
And not because the race is bad.
No, we talked about that in the first part, so you should listen to that first. But we just saw a lot of stuff from teams that were questionable.
Yeah, let's call it that.
Uh-huh. We were talking about Aston Martin towards the end of last episode and how we thought they had a mediocre, so-so type of weekend. Alonso finally got some points, did a decent job. Isn't going to go pointless for the season, which is upsetting to me, but it is what it is. And then there's the whole Stroll debacle. And what the hell is going on there, Sean?
Yeah. Yeah. So Stroll didn't start, and he didn't start because he pulled out due to medical reasons. Apparently, his wrist has been hurting for the last 6 weeks. And this is, of course, after last year where he fell off a bike in preseason training and broke his wrists and a toe and whatever.
Can I correct you?
So went to...
Two seasons ago now. It's been 2 years.
Okay. Sure. Good. So went to some well-known high-end doctor in Europe somewhere, I forget where, but, fixed him up super fast, and his recovery was impeccable, and he was back in the car in no time, denying Felipe Drugovich a chance to actually do something. And clearly when he came back, he was struggling. You could see it. He didn't have on the wheel. His grip strength was weak. He definitely struggled, but he got out there and he did it. And he didn't complain, but it was clear when you looked on board what his limitations were and that there was pain. But that didn't stop him from racing. So he qualified poorly and came under scrutiny from the FIA because he did not report immediately to the weighbridge. So just for those that aren't familiar, once a driver is eliminated from competition, either because they're knocked out in qualifying or if they DNF in the race or if they finish the race, the first step is to go to the weigh scales to have yourself weighed with all your equipment so that they can add that weight to the car to make sure the car was not underweight during the race. Okay. He did not do that after he got disqualified from qualifying. He didn't get disqualified from qualifying. He didn't make it through. So you're supposed to get out of the car, go to the weigh scales, and then go about your media duties and whatever else. He did not report immediately to the scale. So the FIA came looking for him effectively, and they were told that he's not available, which is immediately a red flag for the FIA. And that started some proceedings on their side. And then Aston Martin came back and said, listen, he needed immediate medical assessment and he needed help getting, whatever their wording was. But basically he needed medical help, which then meant that if it was that serious that he couldn't report to the weigh scales, he probably wasn't going to race. So the team withdrew him on medical grounds. Fair enough. If there was legitimately a problem, that's the right thing to do. And then we get the reporting from, say, less than reputable sources that there was an altercation in the garage. Right? Lance threw a hissy fit, started throwing things and swearing at people and, whatever. Just to be clear, there's absolutely no evidence for this.
I believe it.
It's all unsubstantiated, anonymous sources. Nobody will come out and say, yes, I saw this. We've even had some people in the team who are not team principals come out and say, no, that didn't happen. Yes, he was upset, but he didn't throw or hit anything. That's changed in the last day or so. Somebody's come out and said, yeah, he may have thrown a helmet, but a helmet doesn't re-break your wrist. So this just goes to the shitty reporting that we have in F1, that they're willing to report unsubstantiated rumor with no credible source. So the implication is that he threw a hissy fit and he punched something or he hit something and it aggravated the injury in his wrist. Okay. I mean, yes, it is possible to punch or hit something hard enough to break a bone. But, I mean, I don't buy it, especially because we would have seen video. There's too many cameras in the paddock to have not caught that. Additionally, I went back and I watched the onboard for qualifying from Lance Stroll's cockpit. There is no signs that he was struggling. And like I mentioned, in the first race when he came back after the injury, we saw it. You could see in the way he held the steering wheel. You could see in his range of motion. You could see in how he, on the cool down laps, what he was doing with his hands and his fingers to try and relieve some of the discomfort. If he was in so much pain that he couldn't race, to me that indicates that he's in more pain than he was at that point. And to not see any of that in the onboard tells me that this is them making up a story. So did he punch something, hit something, do something in the garage after being kicked out of qualifying? Maybe. There's no evidence of it. To me, this is more likely a case of, fuck this, I'm pissed off, I don't care about this enough anymore. I'm going to my trailer. And, oh, Lance, but you got to go get weighed. Oh, fuck them, I don't care. And then it ends up with a disqualification for himself effectively because now the team has to make up a story that he's injured. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if he's racing in Canada, this was just a billionaire hissy fit and he didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah. There's also the backdrop of is someone going to replace him at that seat next year? There's a lot of talk about Max activating his stay at Red Bull clause in 2026, which never happened after this weekend for obvious reasons. Is Aston Martin trying to find a narrative to keep Lance out while they sign somebody else? Get used to life after Lance? There's also the idea, like you're saying about Dragovic, let's make up this story so that there isn't somebody else racing making Lance look even worse than he is. It's too late to replace him at that point, right? Like they couldn't have replaced Lance for the Grand Prix after.
They could have.
They could have?
Yeah. You're not supposed to, but there is a clause in the regulation that says for force majeure, which force majeure is forces beyond your control. You can replace a driver, but clearly that means that driver would not have qualified and they need to start at the back. And typically it would be like a pit lane start. And you need to have a conversation with the stewards to show that the car is capable of achieving reasonable times despite the driver kind of thing, right? Or here's evidence that this driver is capable of keeping up with the other drivers. I want to say that this happened in Hungary with Felipe Massa at Williams, where Paul di Resta was pulled in. I believe it was after qualifying because I don't recall di Resta being part of qualifying, but I might be wrong. I'm pretty sure he got called morning of the race to jump in that car because Felipe had food poisoning.
Yeah, he was supposed to commentate, if I remember that one correctly.
Yeah, and it was literally he was there getting prepped, and I'm pretty sure he got the call as they were about to go on air and just kind of ran out the room and didn't finish the race because his race boots didn't fit properly. He couldn't feel his feet anymore. So an injury or medical emergency on Lance's part would constitute force majeure. So they could have fielded two cars. They didn't want to. They didn't want to put the effort into doing it. I'm not sure who their reserve driver on site was for the track. I don't know if I saw Felipe Dragovic there last weekend. So maybe they didn't have anybody.
Crawford.
Because Valtteri...
Jack Crawford.
Crawford doesn't have enough super license points.
Okay.
but they have Drugovich, Crawford, and Valtteri. So it could have been that they weren't able to secure Valtteri from Mercedes. So there's a number of reasons of why it couldn't happen. It is weird that they didn't mention it and they just kind of took the cop out of, oh, it's too late. No, it's not. We've seen it happen before. So
yeah, don't be surprised by the media and their reporting on that, making up stories about Lance. This pay driver is not allowed in the league for good reason. The pay drivers they want are allowed in the league, like Zhou and Franco. So they'll find any excuse to get Lance out whenever they can. But you're right, something is fishy about all this. Why wouldn't you want Bottas for a weekend? It's not like you're getting rid of Lance. It's not like anything else can damage Lance's reputation. Why not just get some free points potentially? I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah. It's definitely bizarre, and I can't explain it, because even that scenario that I've put together that hasn't been reported, but is my belief, I struggle to make sense of. So I just need this family to not be involved anymore. Leave Mike Crack as the team principal. Let Lawrence, go count his money on his Bond villain yacht somewhere off the coast of Switzerland and get Lance out of the sport. And then I think Aston Martin actually has something with Newey and with Crack and Ron Meadows. They can get something that works, but they need at least one driver who's competent. And I don't think it's going to be Max.
I don't think so either. I just
mentioned the
backdrop of that. Yeah, it was interesting while that was happening. But yeah, go on.
Did you hear the clause that's apparently in his contract?
No, I didn't hear all of them. I just heard that he could activate and stay at Red Bull, but I didn't hear all the details.
Yeah, so there's speculation about the escape clause, where if Red Bull does not perform, he can activate this clause to get out of his contract. He has to be in 5th place or lower. That's the latest reporting on it. Obviously, no one, as far as I know, has seen the contract. So it's speculation of a leak, basically. But if that's the case, he can't execute that escape clause.
5th place in the constructors?
He's currently in 3rd place.
5th place in the constructors or the drivers? Interesting.
Drivers.
I think he's too hyper-competitive. If he loses, he won't leave the first year. He'll try and stay and try and see if they can fix it and see if he can be part of the solution. That's why I think he's a lock for Red Bull at 26.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to talk about Red Bull first. I wanted to get into the Mercedes engines, but we might as well segue into there.
No, we can talk about Mercedes. It's fine.
But we're just already on Max. That's why we might as well talk about it all.
All right.
It does help explain that weird penalty for everybody who didn't watch the race when he smacked George Russell at the end. This kind of makes a little bit of light of it. If you have a race ban, if you're getting penalties that put you back to 10th and you fall down the order of the drivers' standings, it's a reason to leave.
All right, let me go get you a trampoline so you can jump to a bigger conclusion.
I know. I don't, like I said, I don't think he's leaving. I'm just saying that is an interesting caveat, shall we say. It's now going to be in the back of my mind as the conspiracy theorist of the two. What the hell was that, Red Bull? Just for the record, what the hell happened? They planned so meticulously for a bold 3-stop strategy that was a good idea. And the entire weekend they had sat there and set their expectation at 3rd place, at finishing in 3rd place. And when they had anywhere from 1st to 3rd in their grasp after a bold call for that 3-stop strategy that worked perfectly, and was given a late safety car to save Max's tires, they decided instead to use that said trampoline to jump off a cliff, to jump directly into an alligator-infested swamp that tore them to pieces in front of our eyes. And I could not look away.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, rant, they actually kind of fucked it up before that. If you knew that 14 to 16 laps is where the soft tires stood on your car, why did you jump so quickly to give Max's third stop, Because McLaren still hadn't taken their second. And yes, we know the McLaren can save their tires well. Yes, we know they're good at long stints. But force them into a mistake when you're on a tire that can last longer. Don't jump to your third stop for 16 laps, because if something like what happened, a late safety car, you would have been in a way better position to keep Max on the softs. I was thinking about it just before this podcast. Like, I don't think that's potentially a win that they threw away, in my opinion. I think they threw away a win.
They did. Yeah.
Because if you give Max Verstappen 6 laps in the lead, it's hard to take it away from him. No matter how much faster that car is, that's against him. And you planned for it perfectly. But he ends up 10th after his reckless penalty, which we'll talk more about in a sec. But Red Bull potentially threw away, like, that's a 49-point swing. We'll look at it that way, because instead of 25 points, they ended up with 1. So they are, 24-point swing. I don't know where my math was there. I don't think Ferrari's ever fucked up that badly in the past 3 years.
Oh, thanks for the clarification. They've definitely fucked up that badly.
In the past 3 years?
No, that's what I'm saying. They've definitely fucked up that badly in their history. Maybe not in the past 3 years.
But yeah, sorry, just take the torch away from me before I keep rambling on. Like, they are... This was such a major mess up, man. And at a time when they didn't need to do that. When they needed all the points they can get and all the wins they could get.
Yeah. And I think they were clever this week. And I was shaking my head watching the race, thinking that they butchered it completely. They went soft, and then they went soft, medium soft, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, so when they went medium, I looked at the lap count and went, holy shit, that's a lot of race to get through on the medium. Thinking that, like everybody else, they were doing a 2-stop. And then they started talking about the 3-stop strategy, right? And F1 TV has, what's her name? Ruth Buscombe, who's a former strategist. And she was saying that in theory, this could work for them, yada, 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 but they have to undercut the McLaren, right? So, and I think that's where Red Bull pulled the trigger too quickly. They had to undercut the McLaren on the final stop. If they made their third stop after McLaren made their second, this was not going to work. So they jumped the gun. They got in there early. And then it was this is going to be tight to the end on this tire. And then the safety car hit and everybody shat their pants. Because that effectively gave McLaren the opportunity to stop for new tires, which they had a reasonable set of tires remaining. Right? This was the downside of the 3-stop strategy, is that if you had to react late in the game, you had no more tires. Because you needed soft tires to get through qualifying. You weren't going to do it on mediums. So you had to eat up at least one set, probably 2, to get through qualifying. And then when we got the safety car, Max had no tires left. All he had was hards. And I think there were a couple of teams that ran a hard tire in practice. But I want to say it was FP3 before we saw a hard tire hit the track. This is the hardest tire in the Pirelli range. It does not get harder than the hard tire in Spain. That tire was a garbage tire all weekend. Nobody wanted to use it. The teams that did use it used it to save a set of tires for the race, right? Because you need to use a set of tires in practice and give them back to Pirelli at the end of each practice session. So Nobody wanted to use the hard tire. The teams that did use it used it strategically to ditch after the practice session so that they would have another set of mediums or softs for the race and for qualifying. Red Bull didn't need to pit Max.
No.
He was on a soft tire. Yes, it was a used soft tire, but he was going to spend 3, 4, 5, however many laps it was behind the safety car.
End up being
not
6.
Degrading.
End up being 6, yeah.
Yeah.
To
6
save.
laps behind the safety car to then race for 6 laps. I'm not a professional when it comes to tire life and degradation. But I want to say in that situation, Max could have made that soft tire last an additional 6 racing laps.
Easily.
Why didn't they keep him out? He would have had track position over McLaren, which means he would have been in first. And even if they had better rubber in the last 6 laps, and even if he got overtaken, at worst he would have been third, maybe 4th place.
Yeah.
And yeah, he would have bitched and moaned about not being pit for new rubber, but then the team could have just said, listen, Max, you had the fucking hards, you would have ended up in 20th place.
Yeah, you wouldn't have spun on the after the first corner, essentially, or gone, what was it, lateral for a sec, or horizontal.
Yeah, he was like 60 degrees coming out of the last corner.
Yeah, you're right. He totally would have bitched and complained if they didn't pit him, but he would have at least, I think he would have kept second at the bare minimum. Because if
he would not have gotten passed by Leclerc on merit on the fucking start-stop straight.
That for sure, because he was about to pass Leclerc on the hard before the team orders, and that's another one. The team orders told him to let Russell through, which ended up in hindsight being stupid. But at the time, Red Bull was so fucking nervous that they just told Max to slow down.
Yep. With that, so we've got an overreaction on trying to undercut McLaren. We've got an overreaction on the safety car. And then we've got an overreaction on the penalty call. Right? So he push Russell wide? It was a hard move. Russell did dive up the outside, or on the inside, sorry. I think there was nothing in it. I don't think he should have gotten a penalty for what happened at turn 1. So GP rushing to say give the penalty back or give the place back is another overreaction.
Well said.
Yeah, the FIA may have looked at it and said he pushed him off and given him a penalty anyway, and then we'd be arguing whether the FIA was right or wrong. And in this case, I think the FIA would have been wrong. And anybody who's listened to us for long enough knows that I don't always agree with the way Max races. But in this case, I don't think there was anything in it. I think it was a perfectly fair move.
Yeah, Max saved an accident there. Max saved an accident by by doing what he did.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think this failure comes down to a series of overreactions from Red Bull in the span of 7 laps, effectively, that resulted in 1 point for the team instead of 25.
Yeah, and we've talked about what's going on there with leadership a million times before, so we don't need to rehash that again. But you're absolutely right. Like, you plan meticulously the entire race. You make a bold call all race to do what you did, and then when it mattered the most, you drop the ball in such a way that it irritated Max beyond repair. I think at some level, like, it was his way of saying, if you fuck me, I'll fuck you, by potentially hitting George. I don't know what you think about that. The more I look at it, from George's onboard, it looks like Max is malicious. From Max's onboard, he looks crazy. And from one angle, looking directly at the track, it almost looks like he just lost concentration for a sec. Maybe didn't know he was there. I don't know what your take is on that. But he seemed to do that as a way to say to Red Bull, like, you could lose me. Like, I'm close to a race ban. I'm gonna create a race ban by being so malicious. I know that's probably not what happened. I'm just saying that
it's Hanlon's razor again, Nick. Don't attribute to malice what can easily be attributed to stupidity.
Max was just stupid.
It's a pure moment of frustration and anger. He was so angry in the moment at the team for giving him hard tires, at the team for telling him to give the position back, and at the what the result was of him being passed by an inferior Ferrari and an inferior Mercedes because the team fucked him. He was so pissed off and he reacted in a way that was completely inappropriate and deserving of the penalty that he got. And that is Max Verstappen as a whole. He is a phenomenal driver. We've talked about it. He is a robot, an android. He is not fully human. But the emotional side of the human is still there. And when that takes over, things like this happen.
Yeah, I wonder if even at some level he didn't even see George there. He was just like swerving in anger. Like he was blinded by anger.
Saw him.
You think he saw him? Yeah, okay. I agree with you. Yeah.
We'll watch the onboard together sometime. He very clearly, this is not a situation where he countersteers. And we've talked about that before, where you can see him as he goes into a corner where he's got a fine line where he is, but he purposely countersteers to get closer and nudge the car, which has been the subject of many of his penalties. This is not that situation. He very clearly put that car where it was. As he was checking his mirrors, you can see him looking to the right into his mirrors to watch for George approaching and just gradually let the car slide out to that line. That line that he took was not a normal line through that corner. That was very much I know that this line, the line that I took to overtake you, compromised me. So I'm going to make sure you do not get ahead of me coming out of this line. So it wasn't a counter steer. So, right, it's not such clear-cut evidence that he steered into him, but it's very clear he did nothing to avoid that accident. He put that car exactly where he knew it was going to cause a little bit of damage, but not enough to actually do anything.
So like Schumacher and Liuzzi in Canada. What was it? The one you always talk about?
No. Yeah, it's Schumacher and Liuzzi in Canada in 2011 or 2010. But that was a very deliberate counter steer from Michael. I could see that from the grandstands. So this was Max being very deliberate about being a jackass because he was very pissed off.
And that's what I mean. Like it was his message to Red Bull, like, look what I can do. Don't piss me off. But maybe not. Well, I think time.
He's not thinking about at that point. He's not thinking about race bans or sending messages to anybody but Russell. Right, and he thinks Russell is a subpar driver and has no business passing him. And
we agree to that. Formula One philosophy. That is the banner underneath our podcast name. That exact quote.
I do agree that Russell is a subpar driver to Max Verstappen. That being said, he was able to pass Max on merit because Red Bull fucked Max.
Yes. Yeah, agree. So. And we all wanted to feel sorry for Russell. But then he comes out and uses words like Max was being violent. Angry and malicious, maybe. Violence is a tough word to use. Like he's not trying to kill you, George. He's sending you a message. He's putting the horse head in your bed. He's not giving you cement shoes. Let's put it that way.
You're not allowed to make Godfather references, Nick.
Oh, checkmate, Sean. You're right. Would you like to elaborate on what I just said?
No, because it's not like it. The analogy worked, and that's what annoys me. But for someone who's been very clear that they don't care for the Godfather, you don't get to make the reference. Which, oddly, the guy that ended up with the horse head in his bed is the same actor or the same character that I referenced in the previous episodes.
I'm trying to think of the name.
The name's irrelevant. It's the guy who said he can't afford to be made to look ridiculous. He says that to, I believe it's not Robert Duvall. Says that to Robert Duvall's character, and then shortly after, the horse head ends up in his bed. Anyway, that's Godfather.
Yeah.
Lore.
Robert Duvall's still alive. Wow. Okay. Anyways, yeah.
He is. He's old as fuck, but he's still there.
What do you want to talk about? Do you want to keep talking about what's going on with Red Bull? Do you want to talk about the George thing? Yeah, the world is your oyster, Sean.
Well, let's finish up with Red Bull with our philosophical principle.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something I mentioned to you the other day. It's kind of our own principle we've put together based on our hypothesis of Max Verstappen. So we've said many times that Max Verstappen is a racing android. So he is not fully human. He is part robot. And I was thinking about that the other day. What does that mean from an emotional standpoint? So an android is technically a robot that resembles a human, right? So that would imply that he is a robot simply in human form, right? That's clearly not what he is. He's clearly a human being because we don't have that technology yet. But then that got me thinking about the laws of robotics. And these are largely made up laws, science fiction nonsense that people try to adapt but don't actually mean anything. So one of Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics is a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. So is Max Verstappen as a, let's say, cyborg, part human, part machine, does he fall under the umbrella of Asimov's, or sorry, how do I phrase this? Does he fall under the umbrella of Asimov's laws of robotics? Should he be programmed in a way that stops him from harming other drivers? Or the fact that he's half human, does that override the ability to put him in that neat little robotic box? What are your thoughts on that, Nick?
I don't think that's going to stop him from one day harming Russell. That's my first thought.
But that's not the question.
You're saying should the first law of robotics will it have an effect on stopping Max from harming other humans?
Let's assume that he's a cyborg and he has some level of programming in him. From an ethical and moral standpoint, as a half human, half robot that Max Verstappen seems to be, should he be programmed according to Asimov's laws of robotics? Or does the human part of him override that, superseding the laws and making him subject to the ethics and morals of a human, which are fallible? Let's call it that way.
Well, we've kind of answered the second part of that question before. I think Jos breeded that out of him, shall we say, or traumatized that out of him. His emotions, his human morals. I think he was programmed. I think is a racing machine. So if the machine, if there's someone in the way stopping him from winning, I think by definition he will harm them if needed, if necessary.
So this is the autonomous car trolley problem conundrum then.
The one you're talking about where there's if you let one person die on the track, it'll save
3 others.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's the same problem that comes up when we talk about autonomous vehicles. If your vehicle is driving itself down the road and it sees a child crossing in front of it and cannot stop in time, the only other option is to swerve onto the sidewalk, but there's an old woman who will be killed. What is the proper decision?
Okay, in relation to Max Verstappen, if he can, as we saw in Saudi Arabia, and Red Bull was going along with this, they take the penalty. You know what I mean? I'm going to go much darker with what I'm saying here. If he can still win the race and maintain most of his speed by hitting who's on the track, I think we know the answer, Sean. Don't want to say it.
But this is the question. If we program Max as a robot to say do the least harm, but the situation he's put in means that someone will be harmed. That someone will inevitably be George Russell. I think that's what we're trying to get to.
Yes.
All right. And that clunky set of analogies, I think, is done.
They're good questions, and we set the, what do you call it, the parameters. We made sure we set every parameters, went along any possible guideline we could in order to get there. I wouldn't call it clunky. There's a lot of factors in play here.
There are.
But I think it's unanimous that Max will kill George Russell one day. And most of us are going to look the other way.
Yeah. And I look forward to being deposed by Max's defense lawyers in about 7 years.
If we get famous, I'll come back to this episode and delete it right away.
Yeah. All right. I think we've beaten the Red Bull horse to death.
I just want to say one more thing. Just one more thing about that. They came into this weekend with a bad attitude. Horner wouldn't explicitly deny that he was leaving. And usually he has a really good gift of turning the media against themselves and saying if they try and bring up a rumor on him, he'll sling mud right back at them. This time he kind of just let it happen. Let the rumors circulate.
I did like his response, though.
What did he say?
You didn't hear it?
I thought he said he was just 100% committed to Red Bull, which is a non-response. It's not a no.
Yeah, and I'm sure he did say that. But he also had a comment along the lines of, I speak as much Italian as Flavio speaks English, so that's not going to work.
Okay, that I didn't hear that. That is a mudslinging comment right there. That's everything I just said he needed to do. So good on him.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also I want to just take a shot at Max because I take shots at Lando all of the past year and a half. And Max this year, when asked about the title fight, he said, "It doesn't really seem like a title fight to me." And that's a bad attitude. And if I'm going to shit over Lando for 18 months, you got to do better than that, Max. Just come out and say, we're taking it race by race. We'll see what happens. We'll see where the car is in a few months. That's it.
Yeah, but that's the part of the programming that they weren't able to overwrite. And the human portion coming in with the emotion that, well, fuck, statistically, yeah, okay, I could be the champion, but it's not realistic.
That actually speaks more to robotics. He did some calculations in the moment and said, impossible.
Well, that's the cyborg portion. He's got this processor in his brain doing all these calculations, and his emotional part is running wild, saying, "Holy shit, this is not good for me."
I'm going to see this every week now. Whenever I see him in an interview, now I'm not going to be able to unsee it. Thanks a lot, Sean.
I love it. It's great.
All right, let's wrap up the episode with Mercedes. I already said what I hated about George, but you brought up a good point over text that somehow Mercedes went from the most reliable to the least reliable engine, and this weekend confirmed it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a hard thing to say because the reliability of these engines has been so good. I think we've seen, one Ferrari engine and one Mercedes engine go bad. But Monaco was not a good weekend for them. Right? We saw George Russell's car stop in the tunnel at Monaco, which seems to have been finger trouble. Somebody didn't do something properly, right? So a connector came loose, a wire came loose, whatever the hell it was, because they didn't replace the engine. There was no big blow up. But this weekend, it very much was something went pop in the back of Kimi's engine. So the fact that we have this random shutdown for George and we have this DNF for Kimi tells me that, yeah, we are coming to the end of this engine. And like we talked about in the special episode about Benny and the V10s, which make a decent cover of the Elton John song. Anyway, Mercedes might be pushing the limits of their allocation and their, kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel to get all the components they need for this season to get through to next year. So maybe this develops into something more where we start to see Mercedes engines across the board go pop, which would be bad for McLaren. They have a decent enough margin, but if the quality gets bad, we could see the field tighten up around McLaren because of it. Now, it's a little reactionary to make that assessment at this point, but I mean, we've seen how quickly it can get out of hand for Ferrari
And Red Bull.
previous years.
And Red Bull.
Yeah. Well, Renault, but yes.
Yeah, that could be the last wild card of this season. If it ends up fucking McLaren. That on somewhere along the way to the title, they didn't account for a whole other team's ineptitude, where all the best laid plans of mice and men can often go astray. Where you planned it perfectly, McLaren, but you didn't account for one thing: Toto Wolff and his band of merry men.
Yeah. Just because I'm a special type of neurodivergent, it's often go awry.
Ah. I said astray?
Yes.
Hmm.
No one's going to fault you for it except me, but I have to do it.
That's what this show's all about, Sean. That's the definition of this show.
Isn't it?
And on that note, I think that wraps up the Spanish Grand Prix, unless there's anything else you want to add.
I think Williams deserves an honorable mention as a bad. There was no reason to retire Albon. I don't know if you caught that.
I did see that, yeah.
So he went through 2 front wings. There was no other damage really on his car. And Albon is not the whiny little bitch that just wants to retire because he's having bad luck.
That's Alonso, yeah.
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 So this was the race where everybody brought new front wings. And Ruth Buscombe talked about it in practice that, this is a big undertaking because you've got to make a new spec wing. So you can't modify old wings to the new spec. They've got to basically be brand new developments. But also the teams are planning to break the new upgrade. But this is also a big problem because in the past, if you break an upgrade, you can go to the old spec. This race you couldn't because the old spec wing doesn't meet the new load test requirement. So what she was trying to say, and I don't believe her, I don't believe this is the case, that the teams have to bring, or the teams will plan to bring 12 sets of wings. That's insane. And her rationale was you bring 2 sets of wings per competitive session. It's like, yeah, that's ideal. Give your driver the opportunity to break 2 wings every session. Sure. So 12, which is not the actual amount if you were to allocate 2 wings per driver per competitive session. It would be much more than that, but 12 is a shit ton of wings, especially when they cost like $250,000 a piece.
Jesus.
But that got me thinking, why did they retire Alex Albon? You cannot change the specification of a wing during the race. He broke 2 front wings and they retired him. They did not have a wing to put him on.
Jesus.
They're, again, building on a shoestring budget with the limit of components. They had no spares.
Just like last year after Australia.
Yeah.
They
had one spare wing per driver, and Albon went through 2 of them, not by his own fault, and that was all she wrote. Because you saw it, they brought him in to retire, and then he got a penalty, and they sent him out on the broken wing.
Wow.
So Williams is still, I don't want to call it struggling, but they're still pinching pennies, let's say.
Well, that's important because if they start building Franken cars again like they did last season, it will show up in performance. So 5th may not be a lock.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, especially if we have another weekend where Sainz, who didn't retire, somehow was invisible. I don't even know where he finished. It just shows on my sheet that he got 0 points.
Somewhere like 15th or something. Yeah, that's another guy struggling in a new team.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow.
So I had to bring that up because it's concerning, especially because they've done so well this year so far.
What does Christian Horner say? It's not how you start, it's how you finish. Which gave me a weird image after seeing his junk last year. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah. What is it? Image 76 or file 76? Don't go look it up, people.
Nothing to see there. Literally and figuratively.
It's a finger.
And on that note, we finish our Spanish Grand Prix recap. We'll see you back in 2 weeks for the Canadian Grand Prix. Hopefully that's not the last one too. Let me find out.
No, I think Canada's safe, but this is going to be a fun one. Canada's a great track.
And there's a lot on the line. With every week that passes, it gets more and more crunch time for Red Bull to start turning it on. And it's more and more likely that McLaren will be both drivers and constructors if they don't make something happen. So there's a lot of pressure on them and a lot of pressure on McLaren to get it right and keep the momentum up. 2031. Thank God. Okay, so we got five more years, 6 more years of this. Thank God. Whew.
With the Canadian GP?
Yes.
Yeah, good.
And
if anything,
yeah,
it's a partial street track, Nick, so it's got to stay on the calendar.
You're right. Right, a very small street, but still a street track.
It is technically a public road, yet I've driven in and around Montreal many times. It's very difficult to get in there.
Yeah, isn't it only accessible by metro pretty much?
No, you can drive into it. Remember how we walked through the track and the security guards gave us shit?
The bridge, yes.
Yeah. So you can get there, but it's a park. It's not public road. You're not going through there to get to anywhere. It's it's the Olympic Village basically.
Well, I'm glad, and I hope it stays for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we'll see a wall of champions crash? We haven't seen one in a while. Do you think we'll see Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton hit the wall here? They're the only 2 champions on the grid right now.
Alonso's on the grid.
That doesn't count. But that is a good point.
He's a champion.
Yeah, I know. I was just being a dick.
And he likes to drive angry.
Good movie. That's the biggest lie of this episode.
Anyway, yes, I hope there is a wall of champions crash because they're going to be pushing those margins, and I hope it does happen to Alonso. Not because I want to see him get hurt, but because if it's going to happen to anybody, have it happen to him because it's not going to have an impact on the actual championship.
Well, he thinks he's becoming a champion again one day, so it's his redemption arc.
What's that Titanic meme? It's been 84 years. Yeah.
All right, we could talk for hours. Good night, everybody.
Yeah.
We'll see you after Canada.
Good night.